thank the organizers for such an important event of nowadays. And of course, thank you for your invitation. I'd like to speak about some aspects in additional way according to what we was told before. I will speak on the relationship between imperialism and fascism in 21st century. Of course, the problem is very deep, and it's important to have a historical approach to that. But I like to focus on some aspects of that. We have, of course, to answer to the question, what is fascism and how did it emerge historically? Another question is the fascism as a form of state monopoly imposition during the interwar period and during the Second World War. Another aspect is the fascism after the results of the Second World War. Of course, we have to focus on the nowadays fascism as an instrument of the transnational-monopoly imposition. And this is the problem for taking the fascism as a tool of proxy wars of nowadays. And of course, the focus, the main focus has to be on what to be done and the need to crush imperialism, whose tool is the fascism. Firstly, let me to say that fascism, of course, is an ideological and political trend and system of government that emerged during the period of the general crisis of capitalism. Let me to focus a little on that because it's a forgotten aspect of that question. I mean, after the first victorious socialist revolution, the October socialist revolution in Russia and former colonies of Russian Empire, we have an alternative way of development for the humanity that opened a new alternative way of development. And this is a fundamental crisis for the capitalism as a system. So, it represents the interests of the most reactionary and aggressive forces of the imperialist bourgeoisie, of oligarchy, finance oligarchy. Of course, we know exactly the classical definition of Dimitrios in Third International. Of course, this is not a personal definition, it's a collective work of summarizing, analyzing, and a synthesis of the approaches of Marxists of that period. Of course, we are not focusing in a dogmatic way on that, because any definition have the limits of the historical period. And of course, we have to focus on what, for example, imperialism of that period means and what imperialism of nowadays means. What important changes we have in the structure of the world process nowadays. What are the differences between the way of production nowadays and the way of production during that period, the 30s of last century, for example? And what is the specifications of the financial oligarchy of that period and of nowadays? So historically, fascism is something like a movement, a massive movement because fascism have the necessity of acceptance of the masses and mainly of the working class masses and of course the petit bourgeois masses of the city and of the agrarian sector. What about the ideology of fascism? Let me say that the ideology of fascism is not something original. You cannot find something original in philosophical ideas, for example, because there is not a rational issue. The ideology of fascism is by definition irrational. Why? Because it includes the logic of the super exploitation of people, and it's by definition a racist ideology. So, according to the scientific approach of reality, the reason of the way of thinking of human kind is a way of perception and deep understanding of the laws of the nature of the society and of the human mind. So this is an objective logic which is taking subjective forms just to be effective on making things, relations, and human conditions. So the rationality is something which is objective. The fascists don't need the humankind's rationality. The fascist needs to focus on the mentality from the point of view of the emotions and of the underconsciousness, if you need, not at the consciousness level of human thinking and perception. So you can find elements of Nietzsche philosophy. Let me say that nowadays the postmodernity propaganda about Nietzsche is something very important for the nowadays fascism. Nietzsche philosophy, Oswald Spengler, of course, Giovanni Gentile are some aspects of irrationality which is focusing on the irrational force of the power for the needs of that stage of imperialism, and especially for the needs of the ruling class of the imperialist countries, where we had very strong working class movements which were defeated. And this is a very important issue, to my opinion. So, fascist ideology focuses on ideas of the greatness of the race, greatness of the nation, the mystification of the land and blood ties, military expansionism, racial inequality, and of course, class harmony. Concept of popular community and corporatism, leadership, the principle of the natural leader, the Führer, etc. These ideas found formal expression in Nazism as set out in Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. So, the fascism during the state monopoly imposition during the interwar period is a specific stage of appearance of fascism as an instrument for imperialism in some special cases. fascism appeared as a counter-revolutionary reaction to the rise of the revolutionary movement after the victory of the Great October Socialist Revolution. Precursors of fascist regimes were the formations that emerged after the October Revolution during the class civil war and the foreign imperialist intervention in the territory that came under the control of the imperialist invaders and their local white collaborators and subordinates until the later were crushed by the Revolutionary Red Army. I have to focus a little on that because, to my opinion, historically, the first formations of fascist, not only far-right, but fascist or monarcho-fascist orientated states or protectorate states were the state formations during the so-called civil war in Soviet Union, in early Soviet Union. Please focus your studies a little on that, and it will be very interesting. They were focused to destroy Russia and colonies, former colonies of Russia, destroying Bolshevism. They wanted to destroy the Russian unity. They wanted to make proxy states, and actually there were the first proxy states of the imperialist invasion in early Soviet Union. So, of course, we had similar formations during the invasion of Japanese militarist regime in China, Korea, Indochina, etc. Of course, what happened in Manchuria, what happened in Korean Peninsula during the 30s, and what happened in Spain during the civil war in Spain, an invention in which, just think about it, 3,000, 300,000 of Germany fascist army were involved in so-called civil war in Spain. Is that a civil war? It's just one of the episodes as a Manchuria invasion, as the Libya invasion of fascist Italy and in Africa, etc. They're acts of the Second World War. This is not episodes, but acts of Second World War. So, the aggressive foreign policy of the fascist regimes established a number of countries of capitalist Europe, Germany, Italy, Spain, eventually led to Second World War. The fascist anti-Soviet, I have to focus on that. Fascism, because it's a result of the general crisis of capitalism, anytime is far anti-communist, anti-Soviet, etc., by definition, against people, against people's sovereignty, and against mainly working class and alternative way of developing of the countries. So they were anti-communist, and they made the aggressive anti-Comintern axis, which was formed under the Nazist Germany, fascist Italy, militarist, monarcho-fascist Japan, and their allies. This axis, through the war, it waged, became the mortal enemy not only of the USSR, but of the whole of progressive humanity, and in particular of the international revolutionary workers' movement. The fascist axis was crushed mainly by the Red Army of the Soviet Union, the People's Liberation Army of China, the Korean People's Army, and the whole anti-fascist front movements, which take, again, as an important information, which movements were led by communists everywhere against the fascism during the Second World War. But fascism appears and after the World War, Second World War. The creation of fascist Germany and its alliance by the forces of anti-Hitler coalition in 1945 was a major defeat for fascism. After the Second World War, fascism was temporarily weakened, but not completely and permanently uprooted. Fascism reappeared in different historical forms in accordance with the changes in the structure, position, and role of imperialism in the world balance of power, in accordance with the strategic and tactical aims of the financial oligarchy of the imperialist countries. These aspirations are connected with the victories and defeats of the early socialist revolutions and the anti-colonial. This is a great difference after the Second World War. We had not only several early socialist societies, but we had massive anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movements. Many of them became victorious. Okay? So the local ruling classes in the dependent, semi-independent, and peripheral countries of the imperialist metropolitan countries, long-lasting fascist regimes such as those in former colonial countries of Portugal and Spain established after the defeat of democratic forces in Spanish Civil War, eventually collapsed and were replaced by systems of bourgeois parliamentarism and some intermediate forms. After the Second World War and the defeat of the revolutionary movement in Greece, in my motherland, for example, a monarcho-fascist regime was imposed by foreign invention, occupation of Britain and then USA with the local collaborators. Exactly, we had followed by short-lived pseudo-democratic regimes, and then by another openly fascist military junta imposed by the CIA, the USA, and the NATO. I mean the junta, the dictatorship between 1965 and 1974. The most important thing is that the new occupation of our country, the military occupation of our country, was also an ideological occupation, and the new imperialists who occupied our country after Germany, etc., they used the collaborators of fascist regime of Italy and Germany. They gave them other uniform and weapons and salary, of course, and money, and they are using them until nowadays. Until nowadays, the leading class of our country are continuing the tradition of the collaboration to the Nazi regime. But now they're pro-American. That's the difference, you see? So, of course, we had very interesting regimes in several countries. Let me focus, for example, at the regimes of South Korea, occupation regime. Unfortunately, our young people in that period, 1915, 1953, during the war in Korea, they were fighting there by force by Americans, together with our Turkish brothers were fighting there. But they had a struggle against imperialism, Some people were executed from American and collaborators because they were refusing to fight against Korean people there, etc. But this is another big historical issue. I had just to mention on that. South Vietnam, the same history with South Korea. Turkey, Iran, with the Shah dictatorship, the pro-American, pro-fascist dictatorship, because they wanted to make the Middle East so-called NATO. To do what? To stop the communist expansion, according to their terminology, which means to stop the anti-colonial struggle of those people there, and mainly against the Iranian people. So we had in Iran, in Indonesia. Indonesia is a unique case where we had a genocide, a totally fascist genocide against communists. We have to talk about that because nobody is talking about that. More than 1.5 million communists, their families, their friends were killed, according to the official statistics. And Pakistan, of course, and other countries in South America, Asia, and Africa. What is the fascism of today? The fascism of nowadays is a typical pragmatic instrument of transnational monopoly imposition. The bourgeois counter-revolutions in USSR and in the early socialist countries of Europe lead to a crude imperialist interventions in collaboration with sections of the newly formed local bourgeoisie, to civil wars, to separatist nationalist movements, to the fragmentation of countries, coups, and series of fascist-style dictatorships. That's begun from Yugoslavia. They destroyed Yugoslavia as a model of destroying the achievements of anti-fascist victory of the peoples, and as a model for moving in that way the destruction in former Soviet Union and even in Russia later. So we had typical cases of the racist regimes of the three so-called Baltic democracies, openly led for decades by dissidents and spiritual successors of Nazi collaborators, with the full support of the US, NATO, and European Union. Historical fact: they took all the SS and pro-Nazist elements from all the former Soviet Union and other Eastern European countries. They removed them to save them from the people. They removed them to USA and Canada. They made communities. They were paying very great budgets for enforcing those communities. They make for them radio stations, journals, newspapers, universities, etc. And they were preparing them for what they have done after 1989-90. They moved them back, and the collaborators of Nazis became the new leaders of Ukraine, of all the former Soviet Union countries. So, we had similar cap regimes were imposed in the states that emerged from the US, NATO, European Union for intervention and the Civil War and color revolutions, etc. We had the Black October in 1993 in Russia under Yeltsin, the Judans in Georgia, and especially the successive coups in Ukraine, culminating in 2014, when Yeltsin, the former member of Politburo of Communist Party of Soviet Union, was killing people using artillery, tanks, and helicopters at the so-called White House, the last institution from the Soviet Union, everybody in the democratic Western world were very happy, because that was the victory of democracy, you see. So we had pro-fascist regimes, and the postmodern propaganda of new liberalism used to persuade people that this is the victory of democracy and free market economy, etc. So, the world capitalist system today is not in the states of 20th century imperialism, whose defining feature was state monopoly regulation at the level of the nation state. A particular form of the forced militarization was the classical fascism of the interwar period and of the Second World War period. Today, we're in the states of transnational monopoly imposition, and the focus of the world over imperialist oligarchy is to make global governance according to the interests of those transnational monopoly groups. So, this stage is characterized by the attempt to completely subordinate humanity to the most powerful international multi-branch monopoly groups, to the most powerful in terms of capital, to the imperialist countries and their transnational organs. The sphere of circulation, export of goods or capital, no longer plays an important role in the structure of the nowadays relations of production of the present stage of imperialism. This role of this role is now played by the sphere of the production itself. It's a unique situation. We have production distributed on a planetary scale and rooted in the technologies and organization of this production. This is a new form of imperialism, a new stage of imperialism, we could say, which involves the hardcore of production. We have the globalization of production. This is not only financial globalization. This is not such a simplified stupidity as a financialization, blah, blah, according to some academics of universities. This is very hard new condition. We have a specific way of production and reproduction of the working class as a subject of world, all over the world, of planetary production, according to the needs of transnational corporations, which residences, R&D structures, etc., are focused, localized in the former powerful colonial countries, nowadays called G7, excuse me. Okay. Okay, so nowadays we have the World War III. this is not something to come. We live in it. If officially in Ukraine we have more than 55 countries involved one way or another, is that a local conflict? If we have something very similar in Syria, is that a local conflict? Rhetorical, I'm asking. Okay, so we are afraid of talking about that, but we have the Third World War. And because of the limit of the time, let me throw out my text and focus on that. In Third World War, the main issue is the struggle between the former very powerful colonial countries, metropolis of imperialism, and all the other world. I mean, against the other world, they are fighting, and they made their axis. The nowadays one unique imperialist axis led by USA is the axis of USA, NATO, European Union, etc. And the opposite power is one way or another consolidated. The level of consolidation is another issue. But they are trying to be consolidated. And what we can find there? We can find the early socialist countries which continue to develop. Because some people in Europe think that the defeat of socialism in Europe and Soviet Union is the end of the history until now. No, we have socialist countries which are developing. And especially the China way of socialist development is very important for the humanity because we have the unique historical fact that from the point of view of the real production and productivity, from the point of view of scientific and technological revolution, the achievements of China are the highest in history. We have the unique possibility to have the leadership from the point of view of the most progressive achievements of fundamental science and technology. This is unique. During the 20th century, we had two superpowers, but Soviet Union was very unique in armaments and in industrial technological complex of war. Nowadays, we have the possibility of the power even in that. And together, we have unity with anti-imperialist countries and anti-imperialist movement all over the world. So, focusing on the specifications, historical conclusion, historical specifications of nowadays fascism, we can find out that the nowadays instrumentalization of fascism is another level and form of instrumentalization. For example, we have battalions of LGBT fighters in Ukraine. They are fascists, open fascists, but they are for the identity politics. So they are post-modernity fascists and new liberal fascists also. A new liberal ideology and practice, according to the common element of social Darwinism, is very similar to nowadays fascism. Believe me, very similar. So they don't have to have only traditional forms of fascism. We have to fight against imperialism, who is reproducing several forms of fascism for several segments of people for manipulation. You can have LGBT fascism, you can have Christianity fascism, you can have Muslim fascism, Islamofascism, donated by USA, etc. Okay? You can have everything, and you can have Israeli fascism, racism, and Nazism of nowadays. So, in conclusion, we are supporting all the fighting people in Ukraine and Russia, in Africa, in Palestine, in Yemen, in Iran. We have to support heroic Iranian people, which is fighting very effectively. The proxy state, the first historically after the Second World War, proxy state of imperialism, which is racist formation, so-called Israel. We have to fight imperialism. We have in World Anti-Imperialist Platform, we have the main goal of the defeat of imperialism of nowadays. Victory to the people, defeat of fascism and imperialism.